The last time I made one of these videos, I got a bunch of super angry messages from experienced prospectors saying I was giving away too many secrets, and tonight I'm going to do it again. Tonight we're going to talk about lode deposits versus alluvial deposits and where your big gold's going to come from, because it's something that's generally misunderstood in today's gold prospecting community. This right here is a gold specimen. You can see the piece of gold sitting right on top of that quartz there. And it's worn. You can see that it's not as sharp as it would be if it was direct out of the reef. And my question for you today is, do you think this specimen came from a lode deposit, or do you think it came from a creek or a river? Even though this piece of gold is worn, it came from directly next to the lode deposit. I dug it out using a metal detector, and it had traveled down a mountain a ways and been roughed up by the rocks and dirt passing over the top of it. Now, put that safely down there. Gold is super malleable. It doesn't take very much at all to deform it. And I've proven that time and again when I've done gold ore crushes or crushed up specimens just like this to extract the gold out of it. You can literally bend it out of shape with your fingers. About the only way to remove the quartz without damaging the gold is to use an acid wash. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important to understand that the shape of gold is going to tell you a little bit of information about whether or not you're close to a lode deposit, but it's also going to give you information regarding not falling into a trap of thinking that you're close to the source because you're finding pieces like this. Let me explain. I've found many pieces just like this, that look just like this, in rivers and streams. And in fact, you can usually tell when a piece of rock like this has been floating downstream for a while and then the gold has popped off the rock. As I said, gold's really soft and it tends to literally just come off pieces of quartz like this as it gets beaten up in the stream. When you see that in your pan, you'll get a nugget that's got a really smooth side and a really rough side. That tells me that a piece of ore was floating downstream, and then as I have picked it out of the stream, shaken it around in my sieve and dug it out of the ground, more than likely that gold has just popped off the rock, especially if it's very sharp. As I said, it doesn't take much at all to deform that gold. If you're shaking lots of rocks around your pan, every chance that that gold's going to deform. Just because you see me or another prospector pull out a sharp piece of gold from a creek doesn't mean you're anywhere near the source. In fact, the size of gold doesn't even dictate whether or not you're close to the source. Most of the gold that I find in lode deposits is super fine. So fine you can't even see it with the naked eye. You have to either smelt it in a furnace or refine it with chemical extraction, or get enough of that really fine gold in one area to be able to visually see it. Gold often starts its life out as very small flakes. Most of the gold that you're mining currently in rivers and streams, and obviously there are exceptions to this, but most of the gold that you're currently finding has come from long since eroded lode deposits. Forget about the source. Forget about the idea of finding the source. It's possible. I've done it. It's taken me 6 years, but I finally found several reefs that are giving me decent gold. But there is no way, shape, or form that those reefs are responsible for the gold that I am finding in the creek, just because of their location and how slow the process is. Most of the gold you're finding is locked up on bench deposits, in conglomerate, and in the banks of the river. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more. A bench deposit is the product of a river coming through a mountain pass and then slowly but surely eroding down into a gully. You got to remember that most of the gullies and streams that you participate in prospecting, those gullies were formed by that water eating away the rock over thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. When it does that, there's every chance that the water can deviate around obstructions. It can deviate around harder rock. It might hit areas of much denser rock and leave gravels behind up on the hill. When it does that, there's every possibility that if the gold in the creek, if you're finding gold in the creek today, that there was gold in the creek back then from a reef that now no longer exists upstream. And those benches over time very slowly erode due to weathering. So just the same as the creek is wearing its way down into the gully, rain is also washing the banks away down into the creek. If there's gold on those upper benches and you have concentrators are nothing more than where water washes a lot of dirt through a small area like a gutter. The gold can be coming out of those upper benches. So if you hit a really rich patch of really nice gold in the creek bottom, you're probably not near the source. You may be near a bench deposit that's shedding. The second one is shedding out of the banks. That works almost identically the same. You have flood events that create gravel bars. So as a creek floods, different velocities of water are going to deposit gravels in different areas. And every year, every flooding event, it's going to be different because there's different gravel and logs and trees in different spots. And therefore you end up with these low grade, sometimes high grade, but more often than not, low grade gravel bars or banks that become part of the dry land and deviate the creek. The same thing happens because the creek's still eroding into the bedrock and still eroding through those gravel bars when it's in flood. They become concentrated, usually right on the edge. That means that the really good gold deposit that's in the creek that you've just found may literally be the product of a low-grade deposit in the bank that's been concentrated by the water every time it floods. There are examples of how your gold deposits can trick you, especially if you're not aware that most of your gold is not coming from a lode deposit. Don't fall for the trick of looking for the deposit further upstream. More often than not, most of the really good gold is right next to you. If you find a great deposit of gold in the creek, do not be afraid to get out of the creek and have a look up on the banks, have a look up in the hills above it. Some of these bench deposits I've found have been 100, 200 meters above the creek that have been shedding into it. Going out and exploring those areas is really important. Make sure that you are allowed to do that in your area. There are a lot of places that you can only prospect within certain designated areas. You don't want to step outside of them because then you invite the wrath of the authorities on our hobby, and we don't want to do that. But in a lot of places, you are allowed to sample up on the hills and you're allowed to sample in the banks and have a look as long as you reclimate afterwards. And often you're going to find some of the best gold of your life if you can follow the gold to its source. Not the lode deposit, but where it's shedding from, which is more often than not an alluvial deposit. That's spelled E-L, not A-L, which is alluvial for waterborne gold and alluvial for earthbound gold that's coming down a hill. You really want to be looking for those deposits. They are some of the richest deposits I have ever found. I've literally pulled ounces out of some of them because no one else has bothered to trace the gold up the hill. And they're just sitting there, untouched, waiting for you to come and dig them out and have a great day. So hopefully this video pisses off just the right people and I've given away more gold prospecting secrets that are going to make your next trip away that little bit more enjoyable. And maybe you'll come away with a nugget that looks just like that one. All right, guys, give your dog a scratch behind the ears for me. Peace. Bye.